Hello again and welcome to The Luxury Choice, a B2B sales and business podcast brought to you by the training team of George James Limited. My name is Steve Vaughan. I'm a senior sales trainer with George James and I'm also the host and producer of this podcast. And today I've got Prue Layton and Jayne Green, my two training colleagues from the George James team. So Prue, Jayne, how are you both? How was your weekends? Either of you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. We were celebrating a birthday, not mine, but one of my sons. That meant two sons were in the house and
Nice.
It was fabulous to have them there. And then it was interesting cleaning up afterwards.
Yeah, because they're grown-up sons, we should point out,
They're
aren't
grown-up sons, but they cook.
Oh,
And,
great.
amazing. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Useful, yeah. And how about you, Prue?
I actually managed to get out in the garden because it was glorious. So I started all those spring jobs of cleaning things out and tidying up, which is my husband always gives me jobs which are about cutting things down or tidying things up. I'm not allowed any jobs which are nurturing.
All right.
He calls my approach to gardening slash and burn. So
Yeah, a bit like mine, really. Yeah. It's like something like a large animal's gone through and eat anything in the garden. When I've been gardening, I'm not very delicate, shall we put it that way. It was a lovely weekend. It was. We were up in the Lake District, and the weather was incredible. Actually, in fact, it wasn't quite short weather, but it was certainly t-shirt weather. Yeah. It was amazing. We had a boat trip on Lake Windermere. We were up visiting my late brother's ashes are scattered up there, and it would have been his birthday. It was a family trip, and yeah, it's just a beautiful part of the world when the one or two times in the year when it doesn't rain in the Lake District, of course. And apologies if you did live in the Lake District. That's just a personal experience. Anyway, let's not talk about the weather too much today. Let's talk about our topic we've got in hand for today. And that's about the competition. So we've called this podcast, Why is Having Competition, i.e. for the sale, good news? Now, that's going to sound very counterintuitive and a bit sort of bonkers to lots of people, but we generally believe that when you're in a selling environment, having a competitor is really good news. But why do we think that? So I want to get your first line thoughts on that. So I'm going to start with you, Prue. Why is having a competitor for the sale good news for you as an individual, as a salesperson?
We go into sales because we're naturally competitive.
Yeah,
most people move out of particularly in the technical science space, from a academia or lab environment, and we miss a bit of. We're attracted to that competitive side of being able to show that you're good or whatever. And I think if that element was missing, I think the job would be a lot less satisfying. I mean, my last lab job, one of the reasons I moved on, apart from the company car thing, but apart from that, it was I could work really hard all week at the bench and nobody noticed, or I could do very little and nobody noticed.
Sure.
And I think in sales, we like to be noticed. We like our successes to be celebrated and broadcast. So it appeals to people who are naturally good at sales, I think. So I think that's why competition is essential, not just good.
Right.
It's really important.
So it's almost like the thrill of the chase and the coming out on top against your peers and your competitors, Jayne, really. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. It keeps you on your toes, doesn't it? It's that very thing that you're then aware that it isn't just you selling your product, getting to know your customers. Somebody else is also getting to know those same customers.
Funny that, yeah.
As a product. So it makes us sharper if we allow it to. I think it makes us sharper because we have to be aware of more than just ourselves and our product, which is what we start thinking about. I think when we start our journey in sales, we're starting to think a little bit wider. There's other people here that could get this business.
Super point, yeah.
And I like that. It sharpens us up.
Sharpens the saw. Another Stephen Covey habit, yeah. I agree with the competitive nature stuff. If you've ever played sport with me of any format, you'll know that I'm a terrible loser. You know, I have broken the odd tennis racket. I have kicked the stumps down before now when I've been given out by my brother who was umpiring at the time. I have been known to walk off the golf course in years gone by. Yeah, that competitive element is definitely in there in me as well, although my competitive ability is usually far higher than my actual ability at the sport I'm playing, but that's another story. So competition, I guess we've all worked for businesses at some stage in our career where we've had unique selling features. We've had things that make our product almost the only game in town, really. But that's not normal, really. And I think in this day and age of ever-increasing technology, I think the days when businesses or products are completely without competition, I think, are very few and far between. So I guess we're always going to have competitors in the normal world, aren't we, Prue? Yeah, it's just a normal state of business, really, isn't it?
And I think you raise a really good point there, Steve, in terms of we have moments sometimes with a new product release where we have a momentary time where we maybe do have something that stands out, but it doesn't last long.
Sure.
And if in a sales career you live for those moments, then the other 95% of the time is going to be really tough because you're only going to have 5% of your time when actually you've got like something amazing. And isn't it true that when you talk to a customer in a competitive sale and you say, what is it that you're looking for? They list the best things from every single competitor. So they say, I must have this and I must have this and I must have this. And so your job as a salesperson is to weigh up what you have that differentiates yourself from the competitor, that brings more value to the customer. And it's just, that's the fun of the job. And I think internally, we've all know or worked for businesses that have come out of a great scientific idea. And what we do know is that these companies, these organizations reluctantly have to get salespeople on board because they think, oh, this is so amazing that people will be kicking the doors down to buy this. And then they go, oh, they're not. So in terms of delivering, in terms of delivering value inside the organization, you want to be in a competitive environment because the organization recognizes what you bring and raises the whole profile of being in sales. If it's order taking, anybody can do that. It's no fun. You want competition because it makes your job fun.
Yeah.
It makes my job fun.
Yeah, I agree. Your thoughts on this one, Jayne?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a real watch out, isn't there, for that 5% of time when you feel like you have no competition. Or COVID was an interesting, wasn't it? Because people came out and if people had a product that they'd bought prior to that, then in the rush of COVID, and through that time, they bought that same product because they knew they could trust it.
Sure.
And so what then happened is, of course, is the danger for us as salespeople in that position is that you think, okay, my products are flying, I can do no wrong, I can sell loads. And then, of course, things change and customers really do want choice. I don't like buying something. If I want to go and buy something personally, actually, I'm rubbish at shopping, but that's another story. I would like choice, at least one or other. I don't just want this is the only thing that's available. I want to be able to test something out. So when we then realize that we've got to work out to actually bring our product, like Prue said, prove our value, it's really good for us. It switches on all of those parts of our brain that start to get fired up, start to become really interesting. And I think we become way more interesting. We become more invested in the product that we're selling when we've got competitors to sell against.
That's a super point. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make a really good point that when we're customers, how do we behave? I know when I'm in the market for something, because I'm a resource investigator, actually, we should have gone before we go any further, just recognise that sadly Meredith Belbin passed away this week, which was very sad to read, although he lived a fine age. But obviously, resource investigator is a Belbin profile. But I love researching. I love downloading all the PDFs, comparing them, and I will go and compare and contrast. And our customers do the same thing, really. And that's why I think when there used to be a school of thought that in sales that said, "Don't mention the competition. Don't ask about the competition." Yeah. And I don't agree with that. And I see you're laughing, Prue. You don't agree either. Now, when should we ask about whether the customer's looking for anybody else at this stage?
So you follow that sort of qualification of any sales lead.
Absolutely.
It's then. So part of the qualification process, you've got someone who's demonstrating an interest, but the first thing we need to do as a salesperson is work out, is this really a sales opportunity? i.e., is there a chance that this will proceed to a sale, a decision, a purchase being made?
Sure.
We talk about qualification. And so qualifying the lead to convert it to an opportunity. And one of the key things we talk about is understanding the competitive landscape early. So I think we should be confident to have that discussion with customers. Who else are you looking at? It's a very simple question to ask. And I think it means that we can understand from the outset if we're being brought along to be truly evaluated fairly, whether we're just making up the numbers and whether we've got a real chance. Really important.
There's
If
some
you're
great points
afraid
there.
of your competition, then you're not going to be as successful as you should be in sales.
No.
Deal with it. It's one of the things that we are really good at dealing with.
Some super points there, and I think that the feeling was, don't mention don't ask the question, who else you're looking at, because the customer's going to say, nobody, should I be? And of course, in the day of the internet and AI and Google and stuff, you're literally 2 clicks away from finding out the whole gamut of competition out there, really. So, but I think there's a really good point there, Jayne, from a qualification point of view, that if we are up against a really strong competitor in this particular account, they may be a preferred supplier. They may have real technological benefits over us. It may not be our best product in the product range. We probably want to know that straight up, don't we, really?
Yeah, definitely. And it's about the best use of our time. And asking all of those questions right at the beginning, finding out as much as we can. And if we start to sense that they've got a product that they're looking at that they've used continually, we know that they're preferred. We might want to, of course, trial that through the system. If we have got a newer product or we've never actually done any business in there, we might want to test that out. And
that's a good point.
Generally a good conversation to have with your manager. Do we want to test this out and see how far we can go? It might actually give us a little bit more information about them as a company. But generally, it may be one of these things where we have to say, actually, Mr. Customer, I appreciate that you really love this other product. And it might be the moment that we say, at this time, we may not be the best solution for you, and we bow out. But in a right way, but to save our time, if we think we're going to do all of this work, and at the end of the day, we know that they're going to buy the competition, then we could be saving ourselves months of work.
Great points.
And effort. That's a hard one for salespeople.
Particularly new salespeople, I think, to understand. Yeah.
We want to win everything we play, and actually, yes, we want to play as if we're going to win every single time, and that's a brilliant mentality. But the reality, it's exhausting and demoralizing when you know that there's stuff that you could have found out right at the beginning, and we save ourselves some time and heartache, actually, and rejection.
Yeah, super points. Yeah, it's hard for particularly new salespeople to understand, but there's no prizes in sales for coming second. You don't get anything for a silver medal, apart from a learning experience, really. And one of the best things to learn in sales is to lose fast and lose early. If we are going to lose the sale, it's best to lose right at the get-go and then focus our efforts and time and resources and money on things that we're more likely to win than spend all our time chasing what probably wasn't really going to happen at the start, and then at the end say, funny enough, we didn't win it, did we? Because, as I say, there's no prizes in coming second, really. Pri, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was picking up on what Jayne said, really. If you're going into someone's shown an interest, and do you want to say, if we really got a chance, if they've used the same supplier for a long time, and suddenly you're being invited to partake in this next buying cycle, we're allowed to be a bit cynical about it as salespeople.
Of course we are.
And I think asking about, in that instance, your competitor is the incumbent supplier. So being, what would I need to show you that would make you change who you currently use?
Super question.
And if you don't know at the outset, how can you frame the whole sales conversations that follow on from that to put you in a better winning position? I think don't be afraid of the competition. Understand as early as you can what that landscape looks like in terms of how you're going to set out your store, what areas of value you're going to look for and explore with the customer that favour your solution. Because the truth is that there is choice. And actually, the choice is pretty reasonable for most customers. So it's always this balance, isn't it? And this is where, as a salesperson, ultimately you make the biggest difference. It's not the spec. I think we make the biggest difference in successful sales organisations. I've always said, give me a mediocre product and a great sales team, and I'll do so much better than a great product and a mediocre sales team. It's the salespeople that really can make the difference.
Yeah, I think that's a super point. And so this podcast is called The Luxury of Choice. And we call it that because the idea is that you're so good at prospecting and finding the opportunities, you can pick the good ones. But it also works in this context as well, that we have the choice. We don't have to compete for every opportunity that comes along. There's nothing wrong in saying, thank you very much, Mr. Customer, but this time we know we're not right for you, or dare I say, you're not right for us. Might be a strange concept to think about, but we don't have to chase every sale, really. Something that popped into my mind while we were just talking then, of course, and we're talking here about competition being another manufacturer, another supplier, another salesperson, but there is other forms of competition that aren't perhaps quite so obvious, really. What are our thoughts there in terms of how we could also be facing competition that isn't necessarily another product, another supplier, another vendor?
So we often find, I think we sometimes, and people have often not asked the question, and I know I was guilty of that, because we so zoom in on the competition being somebody that's like us. And we think, we're the only person in there, or we're the favoured person. And then you realise the ultimate scenario is you're waiting for the order to come in, and it's actually the other department also were in the mix for that money, and they actually won the money. So the competition was
such a good point.
A pot of budget that wasn't just going to the people that you might have thought that particular person you might be talking to, but it may have been shared money. And they're real big things that we can find out early on in the sale about budget and about what competes with that money, which I love that question. Actually, who else might use the money that is coming in that you're applying for? Can anybody else steal it? I think that's a great one, because customers quite like going, nobody's going to steal my money, but I know the other department want to use it too.
It's a super point, really. And for this podcast, we unpick little bits of sales and sales process, because all these things are actually in reality all linked in, and asking the question about the budget. And what inexperienced salespeople often get confused by is just because there's a budget, it doesn't mean there's the cash available. Yeah. And I can think of examples where, in my career, where there were 5 or 6 budgets, but there was only one pile of cash and they were all competing for that cash, really. And it was my job to make sure that my customer's budget had the best chance of winning that cash. What other form of competition could we face, Prue, apart from competing for the money? Is there any other kind of competition we could face?
I don't know. It's a bit of a stretch, really. But I guess there's sort of internal competition sometimes about who's got the loudest voice in the organisation as well.
Who's the best salesperson internally, perhaps?
That internal, backing the right horse, because often it kind of allies to these multiple budgets. If you talk to most scientists, they will always tell you that their project, their purchase is the most important in the whole business. That's what they believe.
Yeah, funny that.
And they're passionate about it. They're passionate about their work. They're desperate for something new, usually, because they're managing with something that's less than optimum. But there's often another more influential voice inside that organisation. And I wonder often how hard we pursue finding out who that is, because it may not be somebody in the lab.
True.
Very
good point. Somebody elsewhere.
Yeah.
In the
we're out of that comfort zone. They're not waiting somewhere in a different part of the building. It's not the man in the white coat, as I say.
No. And that can be, unless you are open to thinking about it, it can often steal what looks like a rock solid opportunity. And it just goes and you have no idea why. It's gone. I think that can be something that's a challenge as well.
Yeah. We think that the purchase of the new whatever for the lab is the biggest priority for the organisation, but actually they want to resurface the car park, or they need some new photocopiers, or they need new company cars, and we just don't understand that, really. I think another form of competition as well is another technological way of doing the same thing, because in our business of scientific sales, I could think of examples, say in my own career, where if somebody was trying to measure the water content of something, they could possibly do it by Carl-Fisher titration. But depending on the nature of the sample, they could also do by loss on drying, and there's pros and cons of each way. So competition could also be another method or another way of getting the same outcome, and sometimes people understand that one as well. Yeah.
The other way is less smelly than Carl-Fisher, which is
I love the smell of pyridine in the morning. Yeah. Actually, it's a nasty chemical, so don't go sniffing pyridine, folks.
Just do this at home. I'm being desperate to say that.
That's the health and safety disclaimer for today's show. Yeah.
I think as well, people use, is that they're using their internal resources, aren't they, often? So I used to sell microscopy, like microscopes, and widely in the lab. And then at one point in my selling, I sold cell counters, all automated.
Okay.
And of course, people, you'd go in and it was like, actually, how can you justify the price of this cell counting that's brilliant when I can actually just get one of my lab techs to sit in front of a microscope and count cells? It takes a lot longer, but I don't have to. They didn't cost in people.
Interesting.
They're using the resources that they've got. So that can sometimes be the competition that you face in your selling role.
But have you ever been in a situation where you've moved from one company to a direct competitor in your career? I think you have, Prue, haven't you? Yeah. Yeah.
More than one occasion, Steve.
And how did that work out for you? When you went to see the customer and one day you were wearing one hat, the next day you were wearing a different hat. How did that go for you?
I think it helped the fact that we haven't mentioned this yet, and it's probably really important. While I would encourage anybody who's listening to not fear asking about the competition, what we should never do is be rude or dismissive about our competitors.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and so it's not our job to do that. So we should always favour our products, the ones that we're promoting and representing, be aware of the competition, but I don't want to get into a discussion with my customer about the pros and cons of a competitor product. So when I have on more than one occasion moved directly from one competitor to another, I was very lucky that I got that advice early in my sales career, actually, because I thought it's something you should do, but it's not. So when I have moved, apart from being teased relentlessly by some of my customers, there's a story, I'm sure Steve knows this story, where I moved from one competitor to another. And when I visited one of my good customers from my previous company, first of all, he was quite rude about seeing me because I'd moved, and then he eventually agreed to. And when I got up to his lab office, he made me put a lab coat on with traitor written on the back. His lab coat on. But, you know, he was just teasing me.
Sure.
So as long as you have been professional in terms of...
That's the word, I think, yeah.
Being aware of the competitor, but not being dismissive or negative about them, then I think you can do that. But you have to have those honest conversations with customers because that's life. But no, it's fun when you move. What's really terrifying is that when you go to a direct competitor, it's suddenly they show you everything, and I certainly for the first few weeks thought, I shouldn't be looking at that. It's a really weird feeling. You know,
that's why I lost that sale. Yeah.
I can see all the pricing and what they said about my previous company. It's very interesting.
Have you ever had to done that, Jayne? Have you gone from one supplier to another?
I've gone from working within a company that sold other people's products to actually going to manufacturers. But I've also thought within that environment, I remember very clearly within working in this company that had multiple products, we took on one product line and we were selling heavily on that product line, and we knew who the competition were and they were a big name. And then a couple of years later, the company took on that product as well. So we've been selling against them. Now suddenly we're selling that as part of our portfolio. Yes, where it had been a competitive sale, now they were also one of my big three in my portfolio of products.
Brilliant.
And it's so true. You cannot be disrespectful about the competition. We can be super curious, and that would be my thing.
That's a great way of looking at it.
Be curious about everything that the competition does and why that works so well for a customer. Be careful how we ask all those things. By being curious and asking a lot of questions, we can find out more about what works for the customer. And it's not always about that piece of equipment. And when we boil it down to it, because it's about actually Joe Bloggs, who sells that, has been so helpful, Bruce said earlier. So our curiosity can be our best friend.
It's a great point. Yeah, it's a great point. And we've got a slide that we use in our trainer decks, and I can't remember where it came from, but it basically looks at the main drivers of why people buy from companies in a B2B sales environment. So obviously companies are buying from companies, but it's people that are actually doing the buying. And the main reasons aren't price, it's not brand, it's not the product performance, it's the sales experience, really. It's what we do. Getting on for 50% of the reasons that people go back and buy from that company over and over again is the sales experience, which I know sounds a bit waffly, but what it really means is the salesperson's honest, authentic, gives good advice, stops them making mistakes, trustworthy, gives good opinions, all that stuff that I guess we've all built a career on, really. One last question on this, and I think we've covered this before, but I think it's a good point to bring it up again, really. And I think we're going into qualification a bit here as well as handling the competition, but I want to just imagine the scenario, and we've all been there. We're bombing down the motorway at legal speeds, of course, and the phone rings, and we don't know who's on the phone, so it goes to answer machine. And then we, of course, pull off the motorway and call the customer back. And the customer says, Steve, yes, thank you for calling me. You don't know me, but I'd like a quote for one of your products. I've been looking on your website, and I'd like a quote for product XYZ. Can you get me a quote by tomorrow? And we think, great, we've got a lead. And we think, oh, yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Can I find out a bit more about what you're doing? No, I just need a quote. Can you get me a quote tomorrow? Okay, thanks, bye. How do we handle that one? Because I'm sure you're both laughing, and I know we've all been in that situation. First of all, what's going on there, Jayne? What do you think is really going on there? What's the customer doing?
Typically, you're that third quote that they require.
Of course we are.
When they don't want to know anymore, they're not interested. In fact, I think it's quite generous that you said, I want the quote by tomorrow. I remember many instances years ago where I need a quote by the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, completely. Yeah. So the purchasing person has told the guy in the lab, or it might even be the purchasing person, you need to get 3 quotes. Make sure you're getting a good deal. Yeah. Okay. So we all know what's happening, but what would you do in that situation, Prue? How would you handle that one? Would you do the quote?
Of course I wouldn't.
Interesting. Okay. Why not?
Because I really worry. You think when we're in sales, we get really hung up on this word, yes. Yeah, that's fine. Yes, I'll do that. Yes, that isn't a problem. And we want to please and we want to problem solve for the customer. So when it's almost hit back on you in terms of they want a quote and you know what's going on, but you don't want to say, no, you can't have one. But you do not want them to have one under most circumstances. And right. The reason I say that is I worry about what happens to that quote.
Okay, that's a good point.
If you go in it eyes open, going, really not serious, but it's really rude to turn down, and they might think I'm not a very nice person or not a very good organisation. Number one, what price do you put on the quote?
Good question.
You've got nothing to work on. So do you go in at list price, or do you go in at the best deal ever and just hope it provokes a conversation? How do you know? So if you go in at list price, and it goes into purchasing who've clearly asked for this, they'll look at you as a potential supplier and go, they're quite expensive, probably never deal with them again. It's like you're putting your stall out with building no value, no conversation. Maybe they are really tied into one supplier, and the supplier has said, look, I can do you a slightly better deal as part of the negotiation if you can show me a quote from another organisation. So your price may well end up in the hands of your competitor. You don't know that.
Absolutely.
So how do you price it? How do you know who's going to have eyes on it? And it feels just really risky. So depending on all sorts of things, I'm happy to have a bit of an upfront conversation, to be honest, and say, look, this feels like really late in the process. I'm imagining as part of your process, you may have to get more than one quote. And that's making me feel super uncomfortable. Because say what you think. I think in sales, we sometimes pull back from actually saying what's in our mind. These are people too. They know they're being cheeky. They know they are.
It's a wonderful point.
It's like, I'm actually in a bit of a quandary here because, I don't want to say no to you, but I'm very reluctant to say yes because you really haven't had the opportunity to evaluate us seriously. And it's quite a lot of work to put this quote together, and I've got to get it past some internal processes. You're not on our system. How can we move forward here? And I would actually make it the customer's problem because I think they're being cheeky.
I love all that, and I think that's the voice of, dare I say, of many years of experience in sales and sales management. Because I think as a young salesperson, I definitely would have done the quote. Whereas now, I would absolutely have the conversation that says, "Look, I know you need 3 quotes. What is it you need? What's the bare minimum I can give you? If I did this for you, what are you going to do for me in return next time? You're going to give me a chance to compete," is probably the way I would handle it. But I think your point about where does that quote go? And by the way, we could have had the same conversation about a tender that you weren't expecting as well. Because how many salespeople spend days and days working on tenders that they're never going to win because they didn't even know it was coming in the first place. But that's another conversation for another day. One last thought from both of you on competition. Any last gems or thoughts about embracing your competitor? Not literally, of course, but how to welcome the thought of the competition. Any final thoughts made with you?
So I think from a customer and a business point of view and a sales point of view, actually, I know that having good competitors out there was also good for me as a salesperson because it meant the business I was working for was investing money in bringing out new products. One of the really tough things in sales is when you don't have anything new to talk about, when you're trying to polish something that's been around for a while, make it sound fab. So there's a driver within the businesses that we work for that competition mean that our business stays sharp, our business invests money in bringing new products and new solutions and new offerings. So I think we should also welcome competition from that point of view.
Great points. Final thought from you, Jayne?
Yeah, see it as an opportunity to grow. If you've had training at any time in your selling,
that's a good idea.
It would have come up at some point. So in any training, when you've been onboarded and you're talking about technical equipment or you're talking about the competitors, all of a sudden, when you are faced with some competitors in a competitive selling environment, or you have to lean on something so go back to the training that you've had, go back to some things that go, actually, what do I need to apply right now in this situation? And it really helps. It helps us to grow and develop.
Super points. Jayne, Prue, thank you for sharing your thoughts today on the competition. Dear listener, if you've enjoyed today's show and you want to know more about the three of us, then the best place to find that is our LinkedIn profiles. You can find out all of our career history. You can find out what the company that Prue used to work for before she went to the other company as well. Somewhere on our LinkedIn, I'm sure it's in there somewhere. If you've enjoyed the show today, then please make sure you subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app. And please also don't forget to give us a nice 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. It does help us in lots of mysterious ways. I should just mention that we've now updated on the George James Training website scheduled training courses throughout the year. So these are courses where if you have a new person or you've got somebody in the team you just want to upskill, where you can send them on a scheduled training course that will be on a course with other people from other manufacturers. They're running in the UK. They're also in France now and also in Switzerland and Germany, and hopefully sooner or later this year in North America as well. I'll be back in again in a couple of weeks' time where our topic is going to be why, as a sales manager, don't all my sales team respond to me in the same way? Funny that, isn't it? In the meantime, happy selling out there, and we'll talk to you soon.